When it comes to defining a market, there is one way I can talk of it to bring an overall meaning of what is a market, and that is extent of the sale of a product. The sale of a product may be realized. Of course, it doesn't matter where. Is it in a matatu? Is it in a classroom? Is it in the church? Is it along the streets of Nairobi or any other region? As long as there is the extent to which the sale of the product being realized, we'll say a market has taken place. Of course, there are designated places where you find buyers and sellers come, they do meet, of course, to communicate their intentions. They do, for example, express their need to be in the market. I express my need to be in the market because I'm holding a product known as A that I'm selling at how much? 20 shillings. I express my need to be in the market when I come nearer to the supplier, to the seller, and I ask, at how much are you selling this product? Driven by my need, I went to looking for that which can satisfy my want. And therefore, when we are arriving at the understanding of the market, there are these two people who have to be taken into consideration. One is a buyer, another one is a seller. And until the realization of the sale of a product has taken place, we cannot say a market has occurred. Market takes place until we have that product being sold. There is an exchange taking place. And the exchange will be, I tell you how much I am trading a product like A in the market, and then you'll be either comfortable to buy it or not. So until the sale has been realized, then we cannot define the existence of the market. Of course, markets will occur depending on that which we are selling. And I wish to take you to the understanding of what we call the classification of the markets. How do we classify markets? The classification. Markets are classified according to two things. One is according to the nature of the product. According to the nature of the product. What is this that we are selling? We may be having what we call the commodity market. Usually this is the common market where we normally trade things like the foodstuffs and other household items. We call it the commodity market. I may use a layman language, the kawaida market. Things like the stores that you see along the streets, things like the supermarkets, things like the kiosks, where we are selling the ordinary items such as the foodstuffs and the household items. We would have a commodity market for that. And of course, this can be anywhere. It doesn't necessarily mean there has to be a designated point where such a market can take place. Number two is what we call the factor market. If, for example, we go to a supermarket, which we all have to be at one point to buy something, you'll find that you may not be able to buy a piece of land at such a point. A piece of land will be sold at some designated places. So factors of production are not found in the ordinary market. They are not found in the commodity market. There are special places where they are being traded. Talk about the labor laws, for example, and how they are instituted, of course, to safeguard the interest of the workers working in different organizations. Again, there are special places where matters to do with the labor issues would actually be dealt with such a way we don't go anywhere. If you're sourcing for, let's say, a given type of resource, let's say manpower of this kind of skills, for example, engineers, there's an organization maybe you can reach to for you to be able to get the best. So it's not all over that you find such information being available. It is within a certain market. We call it the factor market. The money markets also, where we trade, for example, the treasury bills. We are able to get the loans, for example. As such, in the financial institutions, which are special places dealing with a particular issue, let's say in regards to money, you find that this is not available in all places. So such a market, we call it the money market. A good example is the financial institution like the banking institutions. Say the commercial banks would fall under this category, usually dealing with the short-term forms of lending to the society. Treasury bills will also be dealt with under the money market. Finally, we have what we call the capital market. This one deals with the sale and the buying of the stocks. For example, the treasury boards now, the stocks and the shares, which you will not find them being traded anywhere. Go to a supermarket, you will not find shares being sold there. There are some special places where you're supposed to go if for anything you want to trade with shares or the stocks or the boards. For example, in a country, Kenya, we have the NSE as a very good example, the Nairobi Stock Exchange, which falls under the capital market. Okay. So that is one way into which we can be able to, of course, classify markets, because we have said market is a way into which the seller and the buyer would communicate their intentions. They'll come to some agreement, but until we have the sale of a product realized, we cannot talk about a market taking place. The number two way of classifying the markets is by the nature and the extent of competition. By the nature and the extent of competition. Are we facing any competition when we are selling our product in the market? Or could it be that you're enjoying the market share 100% when there is no form of competition? Under this is what we'll now engage as our discussion. We'll analyze what happens as under the perfect competition market. And this is where the market is fully guided by competition emanating from the free forces of demand and supply. Of course, we'll see other features defining our market. Number two, we'll also look at what is a monopoly, a market structure dominated by just one supplier or a seller or a producer. Of course, this market faces no competition at all. A monopoly as a market structure. And An extreme case that normally combines the features of the perfect competition and those of monopoly is a common kind of a scenario that we see in our society today under what we call the monopolistic competition market. Monopolistic competition market. We'll also try and see what are some of the features outlining this kind of a market. I've said this is a common type of a market that we see in our day-to-day life. We experience a lot as a touch to do with the monopolistic competition market. And finally, is a market structure called an origo. So we call it oligopoly market. And an origo means many, or rather a few farms which are operating in the region, selling a product that may be a cross substitute actually. But now, such farms, you find that they are very few. They are all over the country. And there exists a farm that will always be like dominating the others. It's like the one that come up with all the policies to exist in that particular market. A very good example that we can go for is a case of Telcom, which the other day merged the Orange and U. And then we have the Airtel and Safaricom. That field is dominated by those three giants. Of course, the leading company being Safaricom. And we later on see that for any time Safaricom makes a move, the others do have a reaction to one such. In such a market where there is that particular number, which is very few, for the product that is being traded in the market, we call it an oligopoly kind of a market. If the farm is, or rather, if the market is dominated by only two now, we call it a duopoly. A duo is an example of an origo kind of a market structure. So our discussion class, I wanted to look at this particular area. This is what will base our discussion for today as far as the market structures are concerned. So we go back to where we were, and I wish to start with what we call the perfect competition market. What is a perfect competition market? This is let me start with a funny way of introducing the market. Usually it's a market where we have an imagination, because in reality it doesn't exist. It's like an assumption we are making of the existence of such a market. Usually it is a market where the belief is that there have to be so many people from the side of the buyers, from the side of the sellers. Of course, if you are all alone, you cannot be competing. We compete for job opportunities in a country because I'm not the only one who is qualified in that area. We are as many as possible. On a graduation day, you find there's so many people who graduate with the same degree, of course, with the same skills. But the point is, there are very few opportunities. That's when a competition comes in. Otherwise, if you're the only one being awaited by the company to graduate, you'll be observed immediately. But now a competition is there, and that's why we try to be the best, yeah? So the same thing is happening in the market we call a perfect competition market, that the aspect of competition can only come in if we have many buyers who are coming here in the market to look for a particular commodity, and they want the best actually. The same is also happening from the side of the suppliers who are coming to sell a similar product so that they can grab the market share out of what the customer is actually looking for. So the aspect of having many buyers and many sellers in the market is of course to minimize the kind of let's say an authority that each side may take over the market. No single seller, no single buyer who is going to, of course, determine what is going to happen in the market, that the market is controlled fully by the forces of demand and supply. Another feature about this market is that for us to have the competition, then it means we have something in common. And what is common in the market is that all the dealers, all the sellers, the buyers, and the suppliers are dealing with one product, which is a homogeneous product. By homogeneity, we mean both the inherent characteristics as well as the services offered by the product. They are all the same. In other words, whatever used to make the product, its composition in terms of the inputs, is the same as to what another company is using. Out of the production, there's an output that will come out. The product that comes from the production is going to be the same product as to any other company dealing with the same kind of a production line. Meaning, there is no customer who is able to separate the two products coming from two different units of production where the production is taking place, that you can't tell what's the difference. There is homogeneity, and that is the one that is also calling for a stiff competition in this particular market. Another very important point in the market is there lacks discrimination. As much as we are saying that the market is having many buyers and sellers, we leave it free to be regulated and controlled by the forces of demand and supply, that there is no single seller or even a single buyer who can actually influence what is going to happen to the market of the commodity in this particular, the market price of the commodity in the market. Meaning that price being left free to be set and controlled by the forces of demand and supply doesn't separate, doesn't actually favor anybody in this particular market. Another feature about the market is that we assume that there'll be knowledge circulating all over, such a way both the buyer and the seller can be able to tell what is exactly going on in the market. The information is already available. And as such is happening, we are able to perfect the level of competition in this particular market. There is no way to which I'll buy a product. If it is being sold by Mary at a relatively lower price than what Peter is selling, then I can't buy at a higher price. I know where to get that particular product. And that's why in the perfect competition market, I may put this point with a star, in that if there is perfect knowledge, then it means no one will be operating under what we call the exceptional cases of the laws of demand. Such a way, if you find the price is high, you don't buy. You move to where the price is actually favorable, and the price that has already been agreed upon, of course, through the forces of demand and supply in the market. So that knowledge, as we assume it is accurating, it's going to guide both the supplier and the producer in relation to how they are going to behave when the supplier is offering the products to the market for sale, and of course when the customer now is looking for something to buy in that particular market. Another very important point is that for us, of course, to be many, we need not to restrict how many firms are going to get into the industry, how many can get out of the industry. this is actually going to be open so that we are able to allow as many in as possible. Such a way when the firm is operating in this industry, the aspect of competition comes in because there's another that is getting in. However, if I remember, we talked about the shortland period. And we said a shortland period is a time that is too short for the firm. For example, it cannot move out of the industry. In other words, it cannot quit. And we also said if a firm cannot quit, then it means another cannot join in. So when the firm is to consider joining in, that is only possible if the period of time is a long run period. That's why if you have to look at my point number 5 here, explaining about the freedom of entry and exit of the firms, this is only possible during the long run period. And as a result of that freedom, there are so many firms that are likely to get into the industry, of course, strengthening the aspect of competition, that which is building the name for this particular firm or the market itself. Another feature is about the mobility of the factors of production. The mobility of the factors of production. And part of our homework for today, class, you're writing a question, write it down. Discuss the concept of mobility of the factors of production. Discuss the concept of mobility of the factors of production. Question number 2 on the same, part 2 of that question. Explain the various types of mobility of the factors of production. Explain the various types of mobility of the factors of production. And lastly, question number 3. Explain factors affecting mobility of the factors of production in an economy. Explain the factors affecting the mobility of the factors of production in an economy. Explain the factors affecting the mobility of the factors of production in an economy. On the same, put a full stop, you continue on the same part. Suggest possible measures that can be implemented. Suggest possible measures that can be implemented in order to improve on the mobility of the factors of production. In order to improve on the mobility of the factors of production. In order to improve on the mobility of the factors of production. So I hope we have gotten right our exercise for today. Kindly try to go through it. You understand what exactly we mean by the mobility of the factors of production. Now we have said in this market, the assumption is that the factors will be mobile. By mobility, we mean they can be able to move from one region to another, from one farm to another, from one industry to another, from one occupation to another. And that actually also strengthens the way we are going to produce our produce, meaning as the farms get into the industry, since there is a support by the mobility of the factors of production, we are able to understand the way the factors are actually highlighted. And these particular factors say the ones that are helping us to move are the one which will also dictate how much we can be able to produce. I repeat, with the factors being mobile, if for anything we need to move from one industry to another, it's a support we get by those factors being mobile that we're able to move with them, of course, to help increase on the output level for the produce that we have chosen now to engage ourselves into. So perfect mobility of the factors of production even increases the competition even in the perfect market, in the factor market, that you find competition is also noted to be existence in relation to where we have produced. And of course, these factors being needed in our production, they'll also be competing, yeah, because they are all the same required in different lines of production. There'll also be competition now in what we were calling the factor market. Any firm that is operating in this industry, the belief is that it will always be aiming at profit maximization. And this is whether we are operating in the short run or in the long run period. The aim is that we are looking forward to achieve maximum benefit, and we assume we have got no other goal that we are looking forward to achieve. The only thing we are interested on is of course the profit maximization. This is just but an assumption, class, that can never be true, because firms will operate, of course, with different motives. There are those which are there existing in the economy because they want to dominate the industry. They want to have what we call the dominion in the market. The others which want to outshine, so leadership qualities, managerial skills are their main interest as to why they're existing in such an industry. The others where their interest is about the quality production, like for the universities, KC is a good example. We are concerned about our graduates. So whenever we are producing, we are mindful about the quality delivery so that we ensure you people, you are equipped with right skills that you require now. When you graduate, you can execute them, and of course to help increase the productivity of our country. So firms do operate with different motives. There is another that is wishing to give back to the society, charity work, yeah? Another one is there because it is mandated by the government to operate as it supports the mwananchi. So you see, we can operate, of course, with different objectives altogether. But as we look at the perfect competition market, we are saying that the firm is only having one objective to achieve, and that is all about profit maximization. It's just but an assumption, of course, setting a feature outlining a perfect competition market. Another very important aspect about this market, you see, we have a funny point here to discuss, that under the existence of a perfect competition market, the only cost that we are interested on is the cost of production, and that there will be no other cost. Is it true? When we are selling our produce, we will not incur selling cost. Is there promotions that we would want to have, let's say to call for customers to come and buy our produce, let's say to help us, let's say indicate what we call a level of market share that is high. So if we are talking about lack of those other costs, then in the computation of the profit, we intend only to have the cost of production, of course changing now the level of the profit to be realized. That is also an assumption to guide us, because we know that it's not true. There are so many other costs the firm may be incurring. A good example, the cost of transportation, the cost of advertisements, the cost of, for example, associated with the materials that we buy, and maybe at some times we require the remix. So at the end of the time, such costs We'll keep them at the minimum level so that we're able to help to increase the level of maximization of the profit in the farm. Another very important aspect about this market is that we make an assumption no government intervention at all. That again is not true, because in any case, whenever we are operating, we can't be talking of a vacuum. It is an economy where we require to have the government, of course, taking lead in the country. But we are assuming no government restrictions will be there. As such, things like price controls will not be there. The quota system will not be there. Things like the import duties will not be required. So we are free to do things as we wish in the market, and therefore the freedom of entry, because there are no restrictions set by the government. And as such, we let the market to be fully controlled by what we call the forces of demand and supply. Now, that is our perfect competition market. Let's now look at what we call the monopoly as a market structure. Monopoly. And maybe before we terminate on the perfect competition market, I would ask you to identify the advantages as well as the disadvantages that one may associate with the perfect competition market. Try and analyze what could be the perfect competition market, and as such, what are some of the advantages and the disadvantages. Like when we say there's no government intervention, can that lead to an advantage or a disadvantage? Try and see that as far as the market is concerned. Let's introduce what is a monopoly as a market structure. A monopoly would actually say this is a market structure whereby there's no competition at all. The aspect of competing with another is off 100%. Of course, there are so many scenarios that may lead to the existence of a monopoly, but maybe before that, let's see a few features defining what is a monopolistic kind of what is a monopoly as a market structure. This is a situation where the product has got no close substitutes at all. You find that you are the only supplier, you are the only seller or the dealer of the product in the region. People really sometimes fail to see the existence of a monopoly, maybe because they believe that this is a product that is supposed to be dealt with by only one supplier. However, a monopoly may exist in different ways. Like, for example, I enjoy the monopoly, the monopolistic powers as a result of I'm the only let's say a supplier of a good example, let's say stationery items at KCA. No other company that has been given the authority to be supplier of the stationery, and the school is not allowed to buy the stationery elsewhere apart from this particular dealer. So in this case, that supplier who has been identified in the region, the only one, he enjoys what we call the monopolist, the powers out of the existence of a monopoly. You have been identified by the government. KEMSA, for example, is the company that deals with the drugs that get into the government's hospitals. But now you have been appointed as a company by KEMSA or as an individual by KEMSA to be the only supplier now. A company, maybe you are offering services like the transportation services. You are the one to be called all the times no other company that can step in to supply the medication to the government hospitals. That is another way into which we can have the monopoly arising in the region. Okay, so it's not necessarily about the production itself. The company may have identified different suppliers, but you in Kiambu region, no other company that has been given the mandate to be the supplier. You are the only one, and so you enjoy the market share, of course, within that particular region, facing no competition in the region. A single seller or a supplier or a producer, you may qualify to be a monopoly if you are dealing with a very unique product, of course, where no one else or no other firm that is actually the dealer of the same product. Sometimes the government may have given you the rights to operate in a certain region. Sometimes the patent rights, like you have discovered, maybe there is something on your piece of land, like what? Like some minerals, and you want to uh, drill this out of your piece of land. So you'll have the permission given by the government. If you're the only one now, maybe as a company or as an individual, who has been given the go ahead to go and to try such resources to come up with a certain product, you may also be enjoying what we call the monopoly powers within the region. Another way is you possess your maybe way of doing things is so special, different from any other. There's that skill you possess. No other has such skills. The knowledge, it's so common in the art industry, where you can be able to paint and no one else can come up with such a painting. As such, you dominate your own world, and we have the monopoly arising out of that. Okay. A very important feature about a monopoly, now that you are the only one in the region supplying this product or selling the product, and there is no competition facing you, the forces of demand and supply will not dominate anymore. You can be able to dictate to the buyer at what price you want him or her to buy the product. You become a price maker and no longer a price taker. The prices are not being determined by the forces of demand and supply. You have your own way, which is now as a result of you gaining the powers, be able to determine the price of the commodity to go on in the market. So those are basically the main features outlining what is a monopoly. Of course, we have said it could be by a buyer, it could be a seller, sorry, a supplier, or even a producer of a commodity where there is no competition, meaning no close substitute within that region. There's no close substitute of such a product in the region. Where do monopolies come from, or what causes an existence of a monopoly as a market structure in the country? Number one is you owning some knowledge that is so special in a way. If you're to come up with a product, then it will all be unique because you have executed some knowledge that is maybe not possessed by any other person or any other firm in the region. That way, because of the uniqueness of the product that comes out of you executing your knowledge, will actually make you to qualify to be a monopoly firm in the region. Strategic raw materials, which are so special, and you have the disposal on how to execute the use of such resources. Maybe no one else as such resources will be at their disposal. So in line with that, you come up with a very unique product utilizing such special resources. And in this case, you come up with an area where no one else can venture. You may also qualify to be a monopoly kind of a firm. Barriers of entry may be put through the government's patent rights issued, maybe through the copyrights as such. You dominate your own world where the rights haven't been issued to any other, and as such, you also qualify to be a monopoly, a kind of a firm. Some lines of production, a good example is what is happening with the Kenya Power. They are very fragile if they were to be left on the hands of the people, in other words, to the private sector. Reason, their execution requires heavy capital base, and where we have the demand by the production in line with the resources being very expensive, it means not every other person can venture. A few who can be able to get in may mean only one farm, and that could also be a way of experiencing a rise of a monopoly in the region. So capital limitations, the way the demands by the products are, yeah, whatever we are producing in the region requires heavy capital outlay. Such may be limiting so many from getting into the industry, and this may also have meant monopoly arising in the region. The size of the farm. What defines the size of the farm is actually how many units comes from the farm. I repeat, the size of the farm is supposed to be dictated by how many units are you producing. A university cannot be called a university if it is only offering like one program, maybe with only 2 students. That cannot qualify to be a university. But as many programs we offer, the more are the students, then we may have grown to a point where we are given the go-ahead and to operate as a big university. You see, whenever we have a product produced by whichever the market that we are in, whoever now comes in to buy that product, how many there are, they give us the size of the market. I repeat, the size of the farm is dictated by how many units the farm is able to handle at any given period. But the people who comes to buy, those who are demanding our products, if there are many, the farm has a large market size. If there are few, then the farm has a small size market. So what does that one mean? Some expensive commodities in the region may experience a very small size market. Such a way, the smaller the size of the market, you may not go so many people to deal with that product. Like in Kenya, assuming you have to do an automobile assembly kind of a business, and then you choose to go buy, what type of a car would you want to be dealing with? Prado, or these big cars. How many Kenyans are the rich to come and buy your vehicles? Maybe only one in the whole region. So how many of us can venture into such a business? If you have seen Mary doing the business, of course you know you and Mary are only fighting for one customer, so there is no need to get into the business because you may be talking of losses now and then. So the size of the market is dictated by how many people uses your product. The larger the size, the more people can get into the business, and so competition is likely to be witnessed in such a case. But the situations where the commodity is expensive, you find that very few can venture, and the way we are now putting a barrier as a result of what we are dealing with, it's an expensive commodity. How many can support this in the economy? Only 1 or 2 customers. As a result of that, you find the barrier so put by how many can afford is also putting a barrier on how many people can deal with that particular business. And therefore, if it's just one person opening a boutique in the region, reason of no many people who can come and buy these expensive clothing in your boutique, meaning that itself can also lead to the rise of a monopoly in the region. Market franchise. This is a situation where you've been given a go-ahead by the government, let's say to be the supplier, like our example earlier on. KEMSA has appointed you to be the only supplier of the medication to the government hospitals. Maybe your transportation line, you have a fleet of vehicles that you can offer to KEMSA to be the supplier of the medication whenever it is needed in the government hospitals. So as much as you have allowed this particular company to be the supplier of the product, the government, because KEMSA is operating inside the government will have full control of any kind of transportation method that this company is going to go for. Let's say a certain percentage, you have to let the government now take control over that particular way of you operating. You are doing it inside the government. You are operating under what we call a market franchise. If for any, we take over a certain campus, maybe you have identified a campus somewhere, and the campus be operating under University of KC, then it means KC has to be the controlling point of the activities taking place in that other small organization. Of course, it will have its own management, but a bit of it will have to be taken over by the university. That is what we call operating under the market franchise. I don't know if you when you go to town, because I think you are the people who eat chips so much. My age can't allow me to take chips currently. We laugh so much eating those things. Kenchik. And you find kenchik all over. Does it mean kenchik is one business all over the country? We have the name Kenchik. We open our hotel. We go to Kenchik. We talk to Kenchik. Can you allow us to be operating under your name? But every other aspect of what is supposed to be seen in that hotel has to be as per the design made by Kenchik. We comply. And if you were to evaluate what is happening by most of these hotels which are bearing the name Kenchik, you find they have the same colors, the design of the seat is the same, the way they serve their customers, the teller point is actually, the cashier point, is the same. So the design is by the control by the owner of the name, the Kenchik. That is a very good example of how a business may operate inside another. We normally call it a market franchise. So if we are operating inside the government now, as we are the only supplier of this product within this region, we are going to be allowing the government, of course, to regulate some aspects of our operations. Finally, another way into which we may end up having a monopoly in the region is through what we call business integrations, business combinations, or business amalgamations. This takes the form of what we call the mergers and the takeovers. A takeover is a situation where, a good example, a big organization taking over a very small organization, and that they'll operate as one big organization. KCA as a big university, let's say absorbing a small college somewhere. As such, they'll operate as one big KCA university. Maybe they were the only ones in the region, they'll now qualify to be a monopoly. A takeover can happen either horizontally or vertically. You may be looking forwards to get the market, or you may be looking backwards to get the source of the materials. Such a way we may agree, let's come together and operate as one big organization. If we are the only ones in the region also, this can also qualify to be a monopoly. What happens under the mergers? We stop being the name that was older and we create a new name. Like, I don't know, the U and the Orange, when they came together, they agreed to operate as Telcom. It's no longer Orange, it's no longer U, yeah? They have operated as one name. That's a very good example of a merger. And if you are to think of Safaricom and Airtel got in, then would have just one organization in the whole in the whole region, of course, to qualify as a monopoly. So those are the various forms into which we may end up having monopolies arising, of course, in a given region. Our homework for today again, what are some of the advantages and the disadvantages that we can associate with the monopolies in the region? I repeat, evaluate the advantages as well as the disadvantages of monopolies in the country. We stop there for today. Our next two markets, monopolistic competition as well as the oligopoly, we are going to see them in our next class.